Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's always good afternoon for me. It's good morning for our guest this morning, and good morning to Stephen. It's also probably stupid o'clock where he is. Our guest today is uh, a mum, a professional lady, got lots of stuff, got more stuff than I could even sort of, go through on a bio. So I'm going to let her explain a little bit more about what she's doing. She's on Instagram. She seems to be everywhere. I'd like to have the great pleasure of introducing our guest today, and that is Tanis Gaitens. Obviously, I've done that name wrong, like I normally do. So please correct me. And I understand that you're an MD. I always thought that meant my doctor, but I think that probably means something else. So
Or manic
that's enough.
depressant. It could be manic depressant. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah. So enough of my waffle, as they say here in good old Holland. And I'd like to introduce Tanis. So over to you.
Hi, David and Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me. And yes, it is Tanis, Dr. Tanis Gaitens. So you were pretty close. As far as yes, I am an MD. That's true. By profession, I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. It was a long journey to get there through a few different residencies, actually. And currently not in practice, actually, for the last 15 and a half years as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, but that was a huge part of my life and my journey, and I think the formation of my of my thinking and my path in so many ways.
So now what are you doing now instead of doing that? And I'm assuming everyone set this up really just for me, because I probably need the child psychologist more than anybody, because I'm a big 5-year-old.
I'm sorry, hands up to that one, Stephen. That was me.
Okay, just you and you and Diesel and Benjamin. Well, Benjamin aka Diesel, or vice versa, depending how everybody knows them. So I can see what this is. This is really my intervention. So thank you for having that. But we'll do that later off air. But on air, tell us what you've been doing since you stopped for the last 15 and a half years. So what gets you up every morning?
Yeah, and so, and that it actually, yes, Diesel Dunlow, aka Benjamin, is my co-host on Success Journey podcast. And actually, that's one of the things from the first time that we met. One of our was, he said, "Well, you've got one up on me. You're a doctor, and you're Dr. Gaitens. I want to be Dr. Dunlow." So he's currently working on his PhD, so he can catch up to me, as he says. Very cool. So what am I doing? So the last 15 and a half years, well, I have 4 kids. And
so we know what you've been doing. Congratulations.
Well, that is a large part of what I've been doing for the last 33 years, because my oldest is 33. She is in New York City. I'm out here in the Vancouver, Canada area. And I have a new granddaughter there. So one of the things I've been doing is making trips to New York City and to the Upper West Side, and spending some time with my precious grandchild. And that actually does circle back to what I do now. So when my 3rd daughter was born, after a big gap, actually almost 14 years between my 2nd and my 3rd kids, I thought I was going back to work full time when she was born. Not right when she was born, but I thought I had kind of a cushy job, because I wasn't on call anymore after many years of being on call every 3rd or 4th night. I was working in a residential treatment center in Pennsylvania. So I am here in Canada now, but I had moved to the Philadelphia area to do my fellowship in child and adolescent. And I just have to correct you, Stephen. Sometimes people aren't aware of the difference between a child and adolescent psychologist and psychiatrist. So psychiatrist is an MD. You go to medical school first. For me, I actually did do a family medicine residency, and then I was almost done when I changed my mind, transferred into psychiatry. And then after doing that residency in Calgary, I moved to Philadelphia to do my fellowship. So having completed that, I thought I would live in the States for 2 years for that fellowship, but I ended up staying for 23 years. So as I was working as a child and adolescent psychiatrist in a residential treatment facility, which is, I don't know if your viewers know what that is, but that's a place where kids with very severe psychiatric and or behavioral problems live full time and get all of their therapies and schooling and all together. And I was also working in an inner city mental health clinic in Philadelphia. And at that time, I had been introduced to a brand that I had just fallen in love with as a mom and as a physician for the safety of the products, and just fell in love with that brand. So when my third daughter was born, I was supposed to go back to work when she was 12 weeks old, and then thought, well, you know what? I've had a third baby and I'm almost 40. So am I going to miss out on all those landmarks again? And working, full time as a psychiatrist is never full time. It's more than full time. So I was just searching for a way to be home part time. And so I affiliated with this brand to build a health and wellness business, which is now an online health and wellness business. And
can you tell us a little bit more about the brand, name of the brand? I mean, just shamelessly promote it. I mean, that's what we're here for. So.
All right. So the brand is called Arbonne, and it is a plant-based, cruelty-free company that makes nutrition and clean nutrition and beauty products. It's a BCorp. And so a lot of people haven't heard of that, but that's something that I really, that I love. And what that means is that it's gone through a pretty rigorous certification to show that it's not only about profit, but also about people and the planet. And so
is this a US accreditation or an international accreditation? BCorp doesn't say too much to me, but
yeah, it's an international accreditation. And once you start to become aware of BCorps, like some of the larger ones you've probably heard of are Ben and Jerry's, Patagonia, Tom's Shoes. So our company has a mission, which I love as well as a former child and adolescent psychiatrist, which is it's to promote resilience and mental health in children and adolescents. And they partner with, I always forget it because in the US and Canada, which one, I think it's activeminds.org or jack.org in the US that they partner with to go into schools to promote mental health, suicide prevention, resilience, promote kids spending more time in nature, which is shown to have so many mental health benefits. So
you mean like when we were all kids and we actually would come home from school at 3 o'clock and throw our book bag down and go run out and play, and the mom and dad wouldn't even ask where you were going, they just knew you were playing, you came back at 6 for dinner? Instead of the society.
That's pretty much how I grew up. Yes, exactly. I grew up climbing trees. I grew up, at the base of a mountain where it was 20 minutes to the top to ski, and where the kids, where we were outside climbing trees and exploring, living in trees. And now, I mean, that is something I'm passionate about. We know so much about the benefits of time in nature, and we
just being outside and being a kid would be good, but parents don't do that anymore.
And we didn't know that we're getting mental health benefits from from the terpenes and which are chemicals in the canopy of the forest that have beneficial effects on.
Well, I was born and raised in New York City, so we used to play stickball. So all those people that we apologize to all their car windows and house windows that the ball would break. But just so anybody's interested in a B Corp. So it started in 2006 and the first certified B Corp was in 2007. Just so everybody knows. And I think according to this, there's a few of them around the planet, but yeah, so B Corp is kind of a new thing.
It's about 3,000 now. Yep. And it is a way of shopping actually there's a lot of sustainability requirements, transparency requirements. To give you an example, when they did the certification process, because our company's in 6 countries, US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Poland. In Canada, I don't know the figures for the US, but in Canada, they found 12 employees, actual employees of the company. I'm an independent consultant, not an employee, but that weren't making a living wage, and they corrected that. So we have, so Arbonne has set goals to decrease plastic usage by 50% by 2030. You'll see that many of things that used to be in plastic bottles are in glass. Everything that can't go right into your recycling can be mailed back Arbonne cycle to be recycled. And
Well, give everybody the site, because half the people are going to try to figure out how to spell it. So you might as well just go www.
Oh, okay. So, well, you could go to my site, www.tanisgaitens.arbonne.com.
Okay, there you go. And
there you go.
send us the link, and we will shamelessly promote it
Uh-huh.
when you do your thing. And we'll, as David says, down here. So right down there.
So for anyone
is.
who's interested, amazingly pure, safe, non-toxic products that also have clinical studies to show that they work. And I've loved representing this brand for the last 17 and a half years, something that I did to be able to stay home part-time with my baby and my teens, but which grew much more quickly than I was expecting. And by the time my son was born, allowed me to stay home. And I think it's really surprising, the decisions that you make, because I loved being a child and adolescent psychiatrist, although it certainly was very intense and had its challenges. But it turned out that when I didn't need the income from it, I chose not to go back. I chose to spend those precious years with my kids, and having a different, being able to be basically a stay-at-home parent, but also being able to have a much more active lifestyle. So I have just loved the flexibility above all. And circling back to my trips to New York City, back then, because my family is very spread out, I think I had a sense that one day my grandchildren would be spread out, and that I wanted to be able to fly to wherever my grandchildren were, my future grandkids. And so that was what, because as a psychiatrist, I was so tied down. My schedule was, booked 3 months in advance. When I was away for a week, I would really pay for it when I came back. So when my daughter said to me in June, after I had just visited recently, but she said, I don't know how I'm going to make it through this next week. And that was a Friday. I was able to book a plane for, red eye for Sunday night and be there. And to me, that kind of flexibility is priceless.
That's very cool. So the health and wellness then site actually helps you have that, if you will.
It helps me have that, yes, because we used to say work from home, but really work from Wi-Fi. So I can work from the Upper West Side, from Canada, occasionally out on my paddleboard. I live 5 minutes from the ocean here. Nice. And, sometimes my client or team might not know that I just answered a quick call when I was out on my paddleboard. And yeah,
they will now. And now they're going to be like, so listen, doc, are you on the paddleboard? Or are you like really paying attention to what I'm saying? Are you looking at like some otter over the Pacific Ocean in Vancouver? So that's very cool. All right, let me go back to this. Now, your podcast, what's your podcast about?
So our podcast, so I met Diesel Dunlow, who I call Ben. We actually met on Instagram, and I couldn't remember how we met, but he remembers that we met through the hashtag gratitude. So somehow through the hashtag gratitude, we met and we started talking and just felt that in a lot of ways, our values and philosophies were, although we're so different, we're very aligned in a lot of ways. So we had begun talking, and I had started just a really small, I can't even call it a podcast, just an interview series that I was doing once a week. It was called Glow Mind Edition. And I was, coming out of the pandemic, there are, so many mental health issues, and people would, because of my background, ask me questions, especially for their kids, about kinds of therapies, or should they get, therapy or see a psychiatrist. So I wanted to I know some amazing people who do all different kinds of therapy, and people from the mental health world that I wanted to share. So I began doing those interviews just to promote an awareness of what's out there. And because I really do think that we should treat, and thankfully it's becoming more this way, mental health, just like our physical health, that we need to tune up occasionally. And we also need sometimes some new tools. And so I began sharing those people and a bit about what they're doing, and in the hope of just promoting some awareness. And Ben said to me that he would, he wanted to incorporate that in this idea that he had about sharing people's success stories, and of all different kinds of success, no particular definition, but really getting behind the stories of what makes them tick, and perhaps a little bit like what you're doing here, dinner conversation style. Right. but sharing something that we thought would be of value. So I think it was January of this year that we joined together to do our Success Journey podcast. And
Very cool.
we've met amazing people from all different kinds of backgrounds. And it's been really fun.
I did one of those similar to what you're doing about 3 months ago for a group here in Austin. So, and they do it as a radio show. So that was interesting. They're like, you'll stay for a segment. And then 5 segments later, they're like, all right, you'll just stay for the whole show. I'm like, all right, great. Because they kept saying, what about this? And what about that? So hearing people, what they did to get from A to Z is always fascinating.
Yeah.
So I like that.
It is.
But here at Two Old Farts, we get you to rise to mediocrity, and we're very happy with that. So,
well, I don't know if I used to have a reaction to the word sort of excellence. Right. I think maybe because a lot of my life I was, really seen that way. But there's a British psychologist, his name is Donald Winnicott, and one of the things he wrote about was the good enough mother. And he said that you don't have to have an excellent and amazing, you just have to have a good enough mother who basically met your needs. So that good enough term, I think, is one that I like to think about. I like to feel I'm good enough.
Unless you're an Asian child, then you have a tiger mother, and then you're just SOL. So there you go. So, or you have a Jewish mother like mine that never breastfed me. She just told me she liked me as a friend. So, it just depends on the upbringing, I think. So, boom, boom. I'm here till Thursday. Tip your wait staff. Try the deal. Anyway, go ahead, David.
No, just fascinated. Where can we find this podcast? It's open to everybody, I take it, because I think there's a lot of, yeah. And it's on Instagram, is it?
Well, we record on Instagram.
Okay.
And then the podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeart. I think those are the platforms, like the main podcast platforms.
Yeah. And our podcasts are out of like the Ukraine, Romania, Lithuania, like very weak podcasting places, but ours are a little different, I think.
And the podcast is called Glow. Is that correct?
No,
that was the initial small one that got like
okay.
It's called Success Journey.
Success Journey. Okay.
Yes.
You can see I'm I need more meds, I think.
Yeah.
Today.
So I think the full name may be, because there's more than it's Success Journey with Diesel Dunlow and Dr. Tanis Gaitens is the full name.
Okay. Well, obviously we're going to put that down as we always do. It's going to be down here, everybody, so they can see it. So
and they can listen, or they're listening on the podcast, then they'll have to like take notes.
Yeah. So. And while they can find everything on 2oldfarts.vip, which is our new website. The VIP is because Stephen and I feel that we can be very important people, but it's also the very important people that we have the opportunity and the absolute pleasure to speak to. Lockdown, mental health. Were you in Canada during that lockdown? Was it a total lockdown, or was you in the US? Because we've seen big issues in Europe. Lots of suicide rates going up for certainly for young men. And the lockdown was a real contribution towards that. And people came out the other end thinking, "Is this it?
Mm-hmm.
Is this it?" Is that something that you've come across yourself?
Yeah, so I was in Canada. I am for the lockdown, and we had actually just moved here just the June before, the end of June of 2019. So moved back thinking we're moving. We actually came in part to help my mom, who's got an eye condition, and we knew was going to be needing some help. So I moved back here from Pennsylvania. My sister moved from Costa Rica with her 2 kids and her dog, and it was a big immigration back here, and thinking that we're going to be, seeing all the family that we've not seen. And then, of course, as of March 2020, we weren't able to see family at all. So yes, it was a pretty complete lockdown here. just, everything pretty much shut down. A lot of walks. We did a ton of walking, walks, golf, then eventually the outdoor tennis courts eventually opened. So I did learn, one of the things I've learned since the lockdown is to play tennis, which I am totally loving. And, but yeah, I don't know the exact figure, but I think that's what I saw recently was about a 40% increase in depression and anxiety in kids and teens during that time.
Because you said that people were people sort of coming up to you and saying, "Hey, hey, doc, I've got, this is happening in the family. What's a good way to deal with it?" Is that what happened after the lockdown?
Friends, really more like friends were saying to me, like, this is happening with my kid or my teen, and like, do I need to take them to see somebody? And sometimes, some people would say, because there is still sometimes a bias against seeking mental health treatment. And so, those would be the discussions that we'd be having, or they'd say, like, who should I go to if it was someone, because I lived in the Pennsylvania area, like I said, for 23 years and had a lot of connections there. And so those are some of the kinds of questions that, kids, I think, were really traumatized. But then, of course, the lack of socialization and being stuck at home was difficult for all of us. But for those of us who already have partners and who we like, not people who got stuck at home with somebody who they didn't like, because I know that was a whole nother realm of, I didn't mind being stuck at home with my partner, thank goodness. But like that lack of social, I could see, I have 2 teenagers in addition to my grown kids, and that was a really tough period.
Yeah, we found that my kids are in their 20s, but friends were having kids in those informative teenage years, and they're having a real problem now actually having any form of social intercourse within their peer group, because they seem to have missed 18 months, 2 years, where it's really important to find where you are within your peer group. And it changes and it ebbs and flows, of course, as you develop, as you go through puberty, etc. And some of these kids still act as if they're in lockdown. Is that something that you've come across as well, or?
Interesting. You know what, like, I mean, personally, I haven't been hearing about that so much. I mean, observing my own kids, I know that I'm happy that they're out there, develop, like, they have a peer group now, and that they're, when my daughter's wanting to go out at my 17-year-old at 11:30 at night to meet up with a few kids down, but here we live by the beach, so down at the beach, or go do some they jump off the pier jumping and all that kind of thing. I'm really happy that that's all happening.
Those crazy Canadians. So, well, here's my
latest was that my daughter's, said, "Oh, my phone's broken." Well, how did your phone break? Oh, they went on a hike and they did cliff jumping, and she cliff jumped with her phone in her hand, but the pressure of the water, of course, took that phone out of her hand. And
that's funny. That's the excuse that they tell. It's the story we used to use when I was a kid back in the 1840s, when something would break. It was cliff jumping. So here's my question, being an old school guy. So when I was a kid growing up in the the 1860s, it was different, because you were allowed to be a child, right? And you didn't have all this crap, all this electronics and all this. So I think if this would have happened when I was growing up as a kid, I think our generation, and I'm older than you, would have probably handled it better, because we would still go out and play and we would still do this. I think the reason that people got so whatever is because they don't go out and do anything anyway. But I think it was like they were told it was the end of the world and they didn't know what to do. And then all they did was watch YouTube videos and go on Instagram and Facebook, and everyone's going to die. It's the end of the world. Godzilla's coming from Japan. He's going to eat the West Coast, whatever it was, right? But when we were kids, it's like, you watch the news with Walter Cronkite, or you watched, the Wall Street Journal review. Okay, I did that as a kid on PBS. And then you went out and played. So I think in that, I think it's generational. I think like the mental health today is just because, and I know people will agree, I think kids are soft. I don't think they're raised the way they were back in the day when they were like, you handled things. Today, you stub your toe and you're going to go. I disagree with a lot of it because I don't think there's a reason to go see somebody every time there's something. I think you have to grow up. You have to learn to work through things. Now, if you can't, I definitely agree. You need to go get help. But, it's like taking a 6-year-old to it seriously. You're 6 years old. Like, you can't have that many problems. You're like, if you do, then that's a whole nother issue. So I think it's this just generation, whatever they're called this week, that I think that's part of it. I think that's just not, as Jon Stewart said once, it's the pussification of America. And I think it's the globe. I think boys are not becoming men. They're becoming whatever. Girls are, I just think it's a different mentality than when we grew up. It's like, listen, you have to be self-sufficient. You have to do this. You have to do this. And now it's like, go talk to no, I have to learn to work it out, or I'd be a mess as an adult. So I think we're gearing people not to be able to handle adulthood or something. The mommies told them they were special when they came in 300th. When we played Little League baseball, we came in second. We weren't special. We lost. They have no good job. You came in second. Do better next year. And this fact that we coddle them, I think it has a lot to do with it. Like I said, you're the professional. I am not. That's just an old school perspective on it. But I see that with kids today. It's just, they can't handle anything. Pressure, stress, look, mommy, I finished my pot. Who cares? Eat your food. I mean, it's like we praise them for the dumbest things. And I think it's showing now, I think, with a lot of the mental health issues, whether they're 6 years old, 26-year-old, 30-year-olds, they just grew up in a time where, you got a medal for coming in 300th. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what I'm talking about with finance guy. I'll sit here and look pretty now. So.
Well, you know what? I think resilience is fascinating, and I think that's what you're talking about. You're saying You're seeing a generation that's less resilient, and there's Angela Duckworth, who's in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. Did a lot of the original research on grit, which is another way of saying resilience, really, and what how do we develop grit? And I think that. I agree that there's something to what you're saying. I think part of it, does have to do with being, yes, kids today are more monitored, more, more helicopter parents, not left with enough time to be bored. Because I believe that boredom is the beginning of creativity. That when my son would say, I'm bored, I'd say, all right, that's great. Now this is good. This is your time to be creative. Go read a book, go out and play. Yeah. What can you make? But nobody does that. Pardon me?
I said, nobody does that anymore. Like someone will say, I'm bored. Read a book, go out and play. And then you go, we said this, we were at somebody's house the other day and they said to their kids, go out and play. You thought we slapped them. They're like, go out and play out there. You mean, where there's grass and fresh air and sun, all that. Like yes, we want you to go play out there. And you're like, really? I'm like, don't worry, the monster won't get you until 8 o'clock tonight. It's noon. You're fine. But I mean, it's really, that's how pathetic it is. Like, go play. Like, you don't see kids riding bikes, climbing trees, at playgrounds, nothing. It's all, they get home, they put on their little headset or they're on their computer. Like, when I got home, like I said, we threw the book bag down, changed our clothes, and we played. We came home at 6 o'clock, had dinner, did our homework, boom. And nowadays, it's like, where are you going? But my parents didn't care where I went. It was a neighborhood. Like, everybody watched out for everybody, and you don't have that either anymore. There's no communal, like, you live on this block, we watch out for you. You live in this neighborhood, we watch out for you. Everybody literally is now with their face stuck in one of these. Oh, phone. It doesn't show. Good. A phone. And I think that's the issue. I think that's the problem. Parents aren't being parents. I don't think the kids have a problem. I think the psychologists need to work on the parents, teaching them how to be parents again. But like I said, I don't know anything. I'm a finance guy that was born in the 14th century.
Even this is the thing that kept me in Pennsylvania for 23 years, is that I lived in Glenside, Pennsylvania, which is one of those kind of towns, which is a town where everybody is looking out for your kids, and the kids could go outdoors, and it's not just me monitoring them, it's every parent. They could go into any house. If I'm running late to get my kids from the from the bus stop, there, were 5 or 7 people that I could call or text that will take my kids in, and kids would come knocking at the door and say, come on out to play. And there'd be games, big neighborhood games with the kids. And that, you're right. And that's not happening everywhere. So there was a lot of value in that, in that community and that kind of lifestyle for the kids, for sure. And there is more to deal with, like, for parents nowadays, to how to deal, I think, with the electronics and the virtual stuff, right? And a lot of decisions about what ages to allow kids to start consuming all of that.
26, that's the age. Yes. 26 they can consume.
Can I just throw a grenade in here and say, is this I know. Is this a North American problem? Because we have this perception in Europe that everybody in North America has some form of therapist. And if your hair doesn't look right in the morning, you have to call your therapist to get it done. I mean, I'm terribly sorry if it sort of derives your professionalism.
That's a true statement. But 99% of the people in America have a therapist for something, because it's what I said earlier. It's the pussification. Old school people, we're just like, we don't care. We're going to go kick in the door. Let's go. And then that's a different mentality. But everyone under a certain age, and I'm not sure if the age is 50 or 40 or somewhere in between, but that seems that they grew up with a different whatever. But you're right. Every time something doesn't go right, they break a nail, they fall apart. And I'm talking about the men, forget the women. So,
I'm not sure about, I mean, I have heard, I met someone who had lived in, it was either Finland or Sweden for, her kids had been born there. And she said they were 6 and 9. They would walk the half hour to school. And when she moved back to the US where they were from, and did the walk with them before school, but then let them walk to school. Actually, somebody called
child services or whatever.
Yes, as neglect, that she was letting her kids walk to school, and she wasn't allowed to do that. So
where I'm living in Holland, of course, at the moment that you have to do 2 things virtually instantly as a child. You have to learn how to swim, because we're surrounded by water, and get on that proverbial bike. I mean, we're lucky, bicycle. We're lucky because Holland is really that pancake flat. But yeah, kids will cycle to school, 6, 7 years old. They cycle to school. Mum and dad takes them wherever it is for that first 2 or 3 journeys. And then off you go, because, I mean, what could go wrong? That's the burning question. What sort of bogeyman should we be scared about next?
Well, in Holland, nothing. In America, we've got all these, degenerates, if you will, with their vans and want to give kids candy.
Well, it's the same thing in Europe, Steve. But I mean, that it breeds fear, doesn't it? I mean, your first encounter of meeting anybody who you don't know is based on fear, and not, as Tanis very quite said. You have to be, stimulated. You have to be intrigued by people. You have to be interested by people, because that helps you build those social intercourse skills that you're going to need, certainly in your late teens and when you go into further education.
But they don't have that. But they don't even have that when they come out of university, because we would hire interns, and I'd be like, make a phone call, and they would look at you like, make a what? I'm like, the thing that Bell stole from the German guy that got the patent over the German guy. Like, go through the history of what a phone was. And you're like, I don't know, like, pick up the phone. And they're like, what? I'm like, pick up the text. No, we don't text and email in business. We actually call people and speak to them. And they're like, oh, and it's like, that was like, they would have a meltdown. And it's sort of like, are you kidding me? Like, where did you grow up? It's disheartening. And I'm sure if I was born in, 1800s and saw the 1900s, but people were still tough back then. It seems like it's like from the end of the 90s forward that all of a sudden we're just developing little mamby-pambies. I would hate for there to be a world war. I don't think anybody could do it. I don't think you'd have what you had in World War II. I mean, you would. You have guys like me that are 100 years old that would go, but I don't think the kids today could handle jack. And I think it's getting worse. But once again, you're a professional, so.
But yeah, so Doc, what about you? Do you find that when you first meet these kids? Obviously you do the intake, you do the assessment, but just that very first contact with them, are they struggling to just even to speak and communicate as children should?
You know what, I didn't find that, so it's a number of years ago. Yeah, my practice was primarily inner city kids in Philadelphia. I found that the kids were able to connect, but I think that I think that you put your finger on something, as far as I've read something really interesting about child rearing in Germany, and how really, instead of keeping everything harmful away, that they really much more will, like matches, for example, let the child play with matches, let them learn from experience. I think what you want is, you're also sort of describing kids that don't have any street smarts, that they come out and they don't know how to read situations, and even if there is how and decide what is a danger or not a danger, because they've had someone around them protecting them or shaping the environment. And I think that really, as a mental health professional, I think that I don't want to suggest that every child needs a therapist. In fact, there's a whole school of therapy, which is attachment-based therapy, where kids don't see the therapist. You actually work with the parents and to guide, and there's parent intervention therapy as well for kids that are having significant problems. But I think there is a danger when you have significant depression, for example, or other things that can go undiagnosed. Obviously, when we just want those kids to be tough and to tough it through, we don't hear about sometimes important things, and I know that there can be tragic results. So it's a balance, though. But looking back at the whole society, I think that it's interesting, because now that I'm in Vancouver, I remember reading a book by Dr. Kang, who's a child psychiatrist at University of British Columbia, and that book, it's called The Dolphin Way. So I didn't come to promote Dr. Kang's book, but you've mentioned the tiger mom, and then you've also mentioned the sort of namby-pamby. So she calls that the jellyfish parent. Okay. And that in between the tiger parent and the jellyfish parent is what is the dolphin parent. And so I think that's really worth looking at for someone who's, especially for parents who are struggling with, how do I do this? I want to feel like, and it's really with presenting them with allowing them to fail, with being close enough, but not helicopter parenting. And she describes even, running a residency program, having residents come that like what you're describing, Stephen, that just, and what you're referring to, David, that had no sort of social skills or common sense, really, that common sense was missing. And so there's something about how dolphins, I guess, in the wild, actually the mother does help them out, but is a distance away and allows them to experience and to learn from. And I think that's what we want to create for our kids is to, and as a parent of four, I mean, I know it is definitely difficult. It's difficult to let your kids fail. It's difficult sometimes to let them step out into situations where, that you feel might, like I don't actually want to be watching my kids do cliff jumping, but they, thankfully, I've only actually seen that once in Maui with one of my daughters. But the following year I cliff jumped myself. But they, there's so much value in that. And I think as a society, those are things like for us to really take a look at. How do we develop more resilience? And at the same time, though, I think rather than being tough, I think about resilience, and then I think about balancing that out with some kind of emotional awareness, because I don't think we want to bring up people that have no awareness of how they work internally, and because you can create some things that are not very appealing that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's also interesting because you worked in the inner city. So being from the city, New York, I think inner city kids or kids from cities are tougher mentally and physically than they grow up in Boca Raton. And I lived in Boca. It's very nice, but it's a much different mentality, right? Mommy and daddy coddle. In the city, it's like you're going to go across the street, you get on that bus, and that bus is going to take you to school. or you're going to take the subway, or you do this. And to do things, you have to interact with 100 million people, if you will, every day. And so by the time you're an adult and you have to actually go do something, you're like, okay. Like, it's like I go with people and their kids have like lived in little, like a Boca or a Palm Beach or whatever it is, or in Beverly Hills or wherever you want to, right? But they're all isolated. And then they have to go out in the real world. And they're like, oh my God, there's people, right? People drive like idiots. People are idiots. Looks like this is the world. You get on a plane and they don't know what it's like, dude. This is it. It's just and they don't know. But I think kids that are brought up in the city, whether it's inner or just on the skirts, and they have to take public transportation, and they have to do this, and they have to you have to grow up. And I think that's another thing that
there are a
just
lot more
internally.
independence. I think you're saying more independence, and it's interesting for me being back in the Vancouver area, because as my kids are doing things, obviously that it reminds me. I'm actually very surprised when I look back now at the amount of independence that I had. As my daughter's about to start taking a class in Vancouver itself, which is probably about 45 minutes from us. And as I started she wants to drive in herself, and I was a bit reluctant for her to be doing that. And then I remembered, wow, when I was 16, I was driving across the city because I was very musically involved. And so I had youth orchestra practice. I had my music theory on the other side. And so as soon as I could drive, I was driving. But before that, I was on public transportation and just had a lot of responsibility for myself, for getting myself places.
But they don't have that today. If you think about it, right? Look, you even had to think back to your child. Wait. Oh, I have to let you do this because I have to let you now grow up and become a young woman. Not like I'm going to put you in a box.
No. Let me drive you.
I think kids should start driving at like 6 or 7, but that's just me because I'm crazy like that. But I just come from, like I said, a different era where it's like, I had a job. If I wanted something, my parents were like, go work. Now kids want something and mommy, daddy goes, here you go, John. Oh, get it, go work for it. And then they wonder when they get older and you're like, all of a sudden, why can't I have it? It's called a job. I don't know. I mean, so I think there's a lot of things that, with all this, let's make it better. We've actually made it worse for them. So it's almost like it becomes this cycle of, a cyclical cycle.
It may be anecdotal that these city kids are a little bit more harder and more, a little bit more grounded in life going forward. But I do see that as well. I mean, we lived. My kids were born in the city, and then we moved out into the country. And they have a statement. They have a saying in Holland that people in the city have sharp elbows, and so you get knocked a bit, you get pushed a bit, you get shouted at a bit, and people just just carry on with life. So they realize that the knocks and the bruises are not always deeply personal. It just happens in the hustle and bustle of life, and maybe it's that that the young kids today don't get enough of. So so when they come out of this comfort environment, they just don't know how to deal with some of the harshness. Steve says, get a job. Where are you going to get a job? You're going to go to a city. If you've never been or lived in a city or worked in a city, those sharp elbows, you think, oh wow, everybody's hurting me. No, they're not.
Well, especially if you go to New York City. Like a friend of mine used to be a managing director at a large accounting firm, and we had this dialogue over dinner a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about if someone would come work for them that's out of university and one of these little mamby-pambies, if you will, and they'd say, your work is no good, you need to do this. They would be, oh, I have to go to HR. And she would be like, grow up. It's like, this is the real world. So what would be funny is all these kids that were coddled, their feelings would get hurt, weren't getting advancement because the kids that were growing up, if you will, in a city, whether it was Philadelphia or New York or pick any other city, they would get told, hey, listen, that's crap. You got to make it better. No problem. What do you need me to do? Boom, get it done. And they were making advancement, and their colleagues couldn't understand why they weren't. And it was just because, if you pardon my New Yorkness, they had balls and the other ones didn't. And whether you're a male or female, it's that simple. And I think today kids don't have, I was going to make a joke when you said they have grit. Yes, they don't have any John Wayne, but they have nothing. And that's the problem. These kids are growing up to be hollow shells. Great, you can sit in the computer and you can design a game and make $1 billion. Go shake someone's hand and have a dialogue with them. Can't do that. They can't look at you in the eye. They can't do that. There's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot to be said for the guys who do ones and zeros all day. And I'm grateful that they do, but you still have to grow children to grow up to be adults. And I don't think parents see that. Like I said, that's just my opinion. I don't know nothing. I'm a finance guy. So.
Well, I think, yeah, but, my son, sometimes, it's easier for an outsider to come in, and my son, who's 15 now, was shy as a kid, but when he was younger, and at the time that his stepdad came into our lives, he was, I guess, 9 or so. He didn't have those skills, and I think I was excusing it because he was shy. But my partner was kind of insistent that he, learn how to shake somebody's hand, say hello, go to a party and meet people. And he began to be able to do those things because he was shown how to do it. He was invited to do it, and he developed those skills. But yeah, I have to say, I'm grateful for that, because would I have been able to make that happen on my own? I'm not sure, but they're fascinating questions, because as you're talking about the inner city, I'm also thinking about rural areas, where kids are on farms and things, where obviously they have a lot of responsibility, a lot of independence, and maybe
it's opposite sides of the scale, right? It's like you have the city, you have Z, which is the farms, you have everything in between. So I think the city and the farm kids do better just because they have no choice, like you have to do. And everyone in between is kind of like okay, whatever. Like when you have to get up and, I'm being somewhat facetious, milk the cow or get in the tractor and cut the wheat or whatever it might be, or get the eggs. You have a job, you have responsibility, and then, you talk to people. So I do think there's this, it's a very weird thing on how that it plays out. But like even teaching a young man to be a gentleman, like getting the chair, holding the door, standing up when a lady enters the room, giving up your seat on a bus or a subway. People don't do that. So, I'm very much like, you have to do this. And they look at you like the RCA dog. So I'm like, no, this is how it works. And then they hopefully pay that forward. And then people go, oh, he's such a polite young man. I'm like, yeah, so that's how it works. That's how I was raised. That's how it's just like, it's generational. But some people don't do that. Like what side to walk on the street. Stupid things that are still 10,000 years old, and women get offended. And like I said, the one girl many years ago, she goes, you don't have to get my door. You don't have to do this. I'm like, great, you can pay for dinner. Oh, you can get my door. Yeah. It's like, stop being like, just enjoy the fact that there's a gentleman left. Like there's not a lot of us. So just enjoy that fact. And all the women are like, I want to be independent. Great, buy dinner. What? Yep. Take us on a trip. I need this. I need that. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, whoa. You don't want a gentleman, but now you do. So it's kind of like, the guys aren't doing it to be chauvinistic. They're doing it to be, if you will, the gentleman that they were brought up to be. And I think women need to understand that. And I think guys need to learn what being a gentleman is again. Like I said, I know nothing. So I'm here in Austin with people that can't have a thought. So what can I tell you?
I think I was always taught to treat other people how I'd like to be treated myself.
Everyone's a human being until they're not.
Yeah. And that's kind of kept with me, and I can always hear my mother talking into my ear. Just remember.
Well, you hear voices anyway, so
I know.
That's something I love to tell my kids that, and something treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself. Some of the basics, I was just thinking about this and wrote about this yesterday, but after a conversation with my son about how he was doing at work, because all 3 of my kids
are you blogging this stuff? Is that what? Oh,
no, that was just on Instagram. Yeah, I just
okay.
use it as a little bit of a place for content, and but it's just to smile, because he wasn't seeing smiling and saying hi to the other people at work as being sort of a part of what he was doing. He was really focused on his actual task, and we were just talking about the fact that any job you do anywhere, part of your job is going to be to relate to other people, and you'll be part of a team, but also regardless of that, just the difference that it could make to somebody's day that you said hi and you smiled. And you don't have to ask that, have a long involved conversation with them, but that could be the moment that lifts somebody's day, and it costs you nothing other than a smile. So
Oh, agreed.
Working
That's
on
it.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
I
On that
think,
note,
yeah, I was going to say, really on that note, with that wonderful smile we have from our guests today, thank you so much for being with us. This sounds to me like we've got another 2 or 3 shows talking about parenting. I think parents need as much help as kids do, really. But maybe that's another show we do at another time. Thank you very much, Tanis, for being with us today. I wish you every success moving forward. Thank you, Stephen, for your time.
always.
And you can catch all this on twooldfarts.vip. Goodbye.
Stephen and David